And that's how it goes when you have to blast the AC. All right, so it would be a crime to miss our final panelist because first up is a man best known for his work as being the Vice President of Strategy and Development at the Los Angeles Times. He is responsible for the development of popular podcasts such as Dirty John and both seasons of the television series that were based on it. After developing many of the major podcasts for the LA Times, he moved to Bentonville where he hosts a weekly radio show. Please welcome Clint Chef. And joining Clint, these panelists have earned several awards from the Arkansas Associated Press for her journalism work on topics like the Little Rock mayoral race and the Iraq War veterans in Arkansas. She also won a first place award from the Society of Professional Journalists for investigating reporting. She is the owner of Power of the Pod, a podcast production company based in Central Arkansas. There is a new podcast coming out from Power of the Pod very soon. I'll let them talk about it, but please welcome Karen, Steward, and Stephanie Harris. Karen, Stephanie, Clint, it's great having you here. Your content's kind of on the same level, right? Wavelength. And so we want to really delve into how it is that you come up with your content, what your content is about. So now you're more of the producer type, right? You're behind the scenes work, getting them going. Karen, you've done a little bit of both sides, recording and getting them going. So let's just have you talk a little bit about what your content is and how you got started in that, please.
Testing? Okay, great. So my name is Karen Trico Steward, and my co-host Stephanie and I are releasing a podcast September 30th called Burden. It is an investigative true crime podcast. So we've done a lot of video interviews and extensive background research for this podcast, and it's based on a case out of Texarkana, Arkansas. Billie Jean Letterman is the woman's name, and we're investigating the suspicious death of Billie Jean Letterman on the podcast.
And what was the question?
What is your content and how did you get started?
So this got started because I have ADHD and I have to have a million projects going on at once. But I met Ashley, who is the daughter of Billie Jean, several years ago, and so that's how I got connected to how this started. But the way I envision Burden is not necessarily just women and abusive spouses, but there are a lot of cases in Arkansas where families are not getting what they feel is justice in the deaths of their loved ones. They feel like law enforcement isn't doing anything, which is sometimes the case, sometimes not. But so I'm trying to kind of help them do investigations and kind of see what information is out there. I would also we are going to be probably applying for a grant for a more in-depth investigation into kind of historic racism and systemic racism in a specific agency that I'm not going to mention yet. And so that will be a long-term project. So it is true crime, but it's kind of from a different perspective.
Great. Thanks so much, and nice to meet you all. So I joined the LA Times in 2016, and at that time, it's not unlike now, where a traditional print newspaper publication was struggling to keep its revenue at previous levels. And I was looking through kind of the corners to see where revenue was coming. And I had seen that several LA Times intellectual property pieces had been optioned into television shows and films. Some famous ones like The Soloist with Jamie Foxx and Robert Downey Jr. That's an LA Times got a very small check for that. And it's like, well, we need to be involved in that. So my boss, who's now the president of the LA Times, and I started LA Times Studios. And the idea was to basically build trust with our colleagues in the newsroom to kind of learn about stories and development early on, and then kind of apply the best practices of film and television development to say which of those might end up being monetizable opportunities for derivative intellectual property. And then podcasts are something that we could affordably produce in-house or with a small number of freelancers to prove out the concept. So basically like the podcast as a pilot in order to prove out an idea. And then most notably, we did that with Dirty John, which became a super successful podcast, and then became a scripted series on USA and a second season on Bravo. Maybe it was the other way around. And then you can see them both on Netflix now. But they delivered much needed revenue to the Los Angeles Times that allowed for that sort of enterprise journalism to continue to be invested in. Investigative journalism is one of the most expensive types of journalism. It rarely makes its money back. So if one out of 10 of these could be a big blockbuster hit, then we could fund 100 important investigations that our readers depend on. That'd be a really powerful thing. So that's how I got started in it, and it was fun.
So a lot of your content deals with investigations of crimes, of cold cases, or crimes that never were solved, right? Do any of you have any background as private investigators?
Well, that's what journalism is, and I'm a lawyer, so yes.
And then she dropped the mic. Clint, any experience at all?
I do not have any experience in that. The experience I brought to the table is I actually didn't have any experience I had very limited experience as a journalist, like 20 years prior. But my previous experience was running an ad agency. And so for me, what kind of floats my boat in that work and the work I'm currently doing is how do you create content that helps people feel less isolated and alone. And so whether it be really serious topics, like some of the projects we've touched on here, or more, entertainment news or whatever it might be, we're generally consuming that stuff because we know that somebody else might also be consuming it. And there's an off chance we'll be able to talk about it at a dinner party, or we'll be able to find community in that shared experience. And so I got that, the best training I got for that. I grew up on a small town on a farm in North Dakota. I was alone a lot. It kind of sucked. And I didn't like how that felt. And so I drew a picture of a robot when I was 5 years old. It showed up in the Bismarck Tribune newspaper, and everyone around town said, that was a really nice robot. And I liked how that felt. And now I want to make podcasts that everyone else can have that feeling of what it feels like to have a robot in the newspaper. That's what motivates me. Yeah.
All right. Karen.
So I'm not a private investigator whatsoever. I'm also not a lawyer like Stephanie is. But Stephanie and I have both at different times worked for the Arkansas Supreme Court, basically educating people about our justice system. So that's where that desire to talk about the justice system came from.
Okay. And using that experience, do you still have is it a strong motivator? Why is it important to bring up these true crime stories in a podcast form?
Yeah, absolutely. For many different reasons, but working for the Supreme Court made me realize how complex every case is. And that's what I like about these stories. It's never straightforward. And so it makes for an interesting story in that sense. And Burden is a story where I feel like the woman's case was not investigated very well. And then it was doubly insulting when her daughter came forward and said, I was a witness, I saw what happened, and the police never really questioned her adequately. So these people need a voice, and yeah.
And so I was at the Supreme Court when the West Memphis 3 were released, and I did communications, so I was there in Jonesboro. And there are, we watch a lot of TV, and so part of what I want to do is also educate people about the system. And like this case, Burden, I do not anticipate that charges will be brought, but we plan to have an episode where we've got a former prosecutor, defense attorney say, okay, well, here are the problems, the pros and cons of each side. So, you think that these investigations are like these 1-hour television shows, and that's just simply not the case. And so part of it is to bring attention to cases that wouldn't otherwise get that mass attention, but also kind of educate listeners about sort of the reality of the law and its limitations.
Yeah, I'll just add, again, I'm not a journalist or an attorney, but it was really important to me. And I joined the LA Times because of an interest in supporting storytelling that was fact-based and wasn't salacious. And so the background, the approach they're taking to Burden, the stuff that we did, there's a lot of great true crime stuff out there. And a lot of it is entertainment first, fact 10th. And that can be fun if that's what you're looking for entertainment. I enjoy a good horror film also, but it's doing people a disservice because they can't necessarily tell the difference. If the audio that's captured is, fake creaky door effects and like stuff that was kind of brought together through nefarious means for entertainment purposes, again, maybe that's okay. In the case of Dirty John, every piece of audio was field audio. Like there's no anything you heard of person panting. That wasn't someone in post being like, that was like that was the real audio. Like and it took us 4 years to make that podcast, which is like an investment that some podcast factory might not make. So I was really proud of that work. And then with each of the shows, I can't say we hit the bar on this every single time, but they tended to have a point. Like in the point of Dirty John, there's a really satisfactory ending to it. If you haven't listened to it, it's really great. But it really brings important light to this issue of coercive control and how there are forms of abuse that are not necessarily about saying profane things to someone or hitting them or violent, that type of violence. It's maybe arguably even a worse type of violence. And this podcast really helps a lot of people be like, well, gosh, I'm not doing that, but maybe I am doing some stuff that's sort of coercive and sort of shady. I'm going to treat people with a little more respect than I have or whatever. So we had that, truth, that was the approach. And that's why I'm so excited about the project that y'all are doing. I think that work is so important to bring that into audio and to kind of raise the truth-telling part of it all.
And I think being a local story really helps with that too. If you were telling true crime stories from, Florida and you're trying to produce it in Arkansas, and then you're telling this audience, hey, we've got Florida crime. They're like, yeah, well, I've seen that all the time. It's Miami Vice and that type of stuff. But when you add the element of this is close to home, this is something that happened close to you. It affected family members that you may have walked past at a grocery store or in some way or another you're connected to. So how do you take that that story and not just inspire like fear, but like inspire something in somebody else that's local that you're trying to tell about your show and get them interested in it, but also get them motivated to do something about it? Nobody pick up the microphone too quick, Yeah.
I'm not the storyteller again that they are, but I'll just say I'm going to riff off of what you asked, which is that the specific nature of talking about a Texarkana story, or in our case, a story of the Golden State killer who was up in Central Valley, California, or of John Meehan, this bad guy in Orange County. The specific of that actually is the best way to influence the largest number of people, because you don't have to live in Orange County to relate to Dirty John. You could live here in Arkansas and say, well, the setting's different, and that is a character in the story that makes this intriguing to me because it's a different thing. But the more specific it is, versus trying to create something that was for everyone. Like, we easily could have turned Dirty John, based on its success, into an anthology crime series, and then the next one had been another creepy dude who did some terrible things. But that was probably the right business thing to do. We probably left some money on the table, but it wasn't core to what we were trying to do. The second podcast, we would have made decisions that weren't consistent with our journalism judgment. We would have been putting the newsroom in a position to do that had we done that. And so I think, again, like having that nose for news, having that approach to truth, is the best way to inspire more people to want to do the same thing. You could, somebody heard Dirty John and said, I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and there's something not right here with the water or whatever the thing is. And like, I'm going to get to the bottom of it and create a podcast. But, so the specific, I think, does that.
And I don't know if I'll articulate this well, but to me, there's value in kind of showing that it doesn't have to be these extraordinarily publicized cases that matter. It's the little stories that impact the smaller community in Genoa, Arkansas. And they're like, when I saw Ashley the first time, I think it was in 2014, and she was speaking at a domestic violence awareness rally, and it was clear that she was just begging someone to care. And so my initial response was, let me get some journalists to help you with this. No one bit. So here we are.
And I think that's a good thing about Burden is this case has never been covered by the media, which is part of the problem. And so it is original content, and you'll hear about something that you haven't heard about. As far as the local community, on Facebook, we have our Burden Facebook page, and right now it's mostly Texarkana, Arkansas, and Texarkana, Texas. And so the people get, learning a lot about that, and then you get other areas of Arkansas. But like was said, this is, we're going to do Burden one story per season, but you hope that the larger themes are lessons that everybody can relate to.
I want to leave time for a couple of questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions? Everybody's like, I want to ask something. Irvin, go ahead.
So besides the story that you initially talked about, is there other stories you're trying to explore?
So I've got another one that's ready to write, and it's about a little girl who was murdered. Sorry, I have 1991 in my head. I think it was because of Billy. That's when she was killed. I think it was about 84. And we know who did it, but they've never paid for it. And it's a story, actually, it was a series in the Democrat Gazette quite a few years ago. A very good friend of mine wrote the series. And it is just so compelling. This little girl who was, we don't know, but likely raped and definitely murdered and left in the trees in, South Little Rock. I mean, it's just sad. So that's kind of it's already written in the sense that it's been covered. It's not a widely known case. There's, I have a family in West Helena who are trying to get my help. Their daughter was shot, and the manner of death is suicide, but everyone knows that's not true. They know it was her boyfriend, but no crime scene roped off, no photos, nothing. So now this family's trying to get anyone to investigate. So there's that. There's a guy in Conway, he owned a roller skating rink, Larry Billings, and his family you're nodding, you're from Conway, right? So they're like, okay, you don't think it's suspicious that his wife emptied all his bank accounts and like all of this weird stuff happened, but like she was never a suspect? I mean, things like that. So it's there's so many stories. There's a kid who it was a false confession. His sister was murdered, and the police interrogated him. This is out of Camden, I think, and it is the clearest coerced confession of this 12-year-old who was adjudicated delinquent. It's a different system in the juvenile system, but that went to the Supreme Court, the Arkansas Supreme Court, and that was overturned. And so that's a story I think it would make a very good story, because this kid is just so compelling. So it's those kinds of stories. And then again, the one on the agency that shall not be named yet. But there's a lot of history that goes way back. And so I really want to take the time and bring other people in from not a white person's perspective, to help me with that.
I'm not with the LA Times anymore, so but I'll say the way we approached, we had a different challenge. We didn't have what's our next story going to be? It was going to be, we have 140 years of story. Which few are we going to pick? And it's an IP factory. A newspaper, say what you want about newspapers, but they're creating like literally hundreds of original pieces of IP every day, 7 days a week, 365. So there's a embarrassment of riches of story. And so right before we left, or a year before we left, we created a podcast called The Times. It's a daily podcast. It's a lot of work. It sucked up a lot of the resources of the team, but each individual episode kind of became a pilot for the idea of a series. So we'd see something that was in development with the news and be like, we don't really have enough audio yet. We're not really sure if we want to commit the roughly 25, 30 grand per episode. And we're spending a lot. We're also, just for scale, we have podcasts that have, 400,000 views, listens an episode. So like, these are giant shows. And so we're putting a lot of money in, and we need to extract money back, or else we're going to have a problem. And so anyway, then we had basically an unofficial sort of rubric for judging an idea. Like, is there great audio? Does it fit sort of our goals around DEI? Does it, are there IP opportunities? We did things that didn't have IP opportunities, but some of them needed to. Anyway, so that's how we approached it. For me as an individual creator, in my next chapter, I have a handful of stories that I wanted to do at the LA Times that I couldn't because I'm not in the newsroom. There was always political. My influence was sometimes welcome, sometimes not. And so I'm pretty excited to dust off some of those and take a crack at it. Yeah. Oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like just because we could, forever the LA Times was not representative. It still has a lot of work to do. It's the most diverse newspaper in America, but has a lot of work to do. So we want to make sure that we were representing stories appropriately.
Okay, yeah. And IP is intellectual property.
Yeah, and intellectual property. Sorry, trying to because basically we create a story. Now we own that telling of the story. We don't necessarily own the stories of the people we wrote about, but we can now take that and it's a piece. It's an idea. It's like a brand that we can go out and try to make more out of. We can make an event series out of it. We could do whatever. Right.
Clint. Oh yes.
I would say how much it's growing. As of last year, it's mainstream. I feel like you're hearing my messages twice because you were in the workshop, but it went mainstream. More people listen to podcasts than don't. The average listener listens to 8 podcasts a week, and ad revenue in podcasts has really been growing, while in other online markets it's been shrinking. So there's a lot of opportunity. I think. And you said exciting things, but I'm going to go on the other side. Monetizing podcasts, content creators try really hard. And I think for a lot of content creators right now, it's passion projects. And I think we have to learn to move beyond that. And if we want to make a living, if we want to spend the time, I hope that there's a future where we can do that.
So to me, and this is, I don't know that I think this is exciting, but like podcasts are the new blogs, right? And so on one hand, you've got access. Anyone has access. Like someone earlier said, all you need is your phone. And so you can tell your stories. That isn't always a good thing. I'm sorry, it is a good thing. You should be able to tell your stories if you want to, but I find that it's difficult to kind of find the gems sometimes because there is so much content. But I like the convenience of podcasts. I used to hate audiobooks, because I needed to read and really kind of soak it in. Now, ain't no one got time for that, right? So I'll clean or I'll whatever I'm doing, and I can listen to stuff as I go. So I guess that's a good thing. But yeah, they're exploding. But it is hard to imagine how you kind of, stand out in the crowd.
I mean, I want to echo some of the things you just said. In 2006, I was the head of the first social media agency in the country. It's kind of crazy. Called M80. WPP bought it. And at that time, I was going to similar conferences to this, talking about blogs and, the beginning of social media and MySpace and brands online. And then that all changed, got commoditized into a small number of players or whatever. Sadly, I kind of think that's what's going to happen with podcasting too. That's my prediction. What I'm excited about is that maybe over time we'll not really think that we're experts in social media or podcasting or YouTube, but we're actually just like into connecting with people per the reason I'm in this business, as I mentioned earlier. And we'll be able to navigate through all kinds of worlds. And where it's appropriate to do a live event like Ty has today, that'll be the medium. Another day it might be a podcast for Ty. Another day it might be printing messages on T-shirts and handing them out to people, like the gentleman of Flanders does, right? So it's you should be able to have all those things in your toolkit. And what's so cool about podcasting and several of those other examples is that we can do it without a major capital investment from a company that we have to be beholden to. I think that's so cool, right? Like any of us tomorrow could go create another podcast. There's 100 of them in this room. We could have 200 tomorrow if we wanted. That wasn't true relatively recent times. So that's what I'm most excited about, is the power of that and the democratization of access to publish and all that. And the challenge of discovery is going to be massive. I would argue the best way to counter that, I don't know how we're going to overcome that with a lot of money. So it's to be diversified and to be able to, swim with the tide as things continue to change. And maybe the same group of people, or 50% of us, will be in another room about a different topic. But the core of it is still going to be about communicating through shared media experiences of stories.
Gotcha. Clint, we know where to listen to yours, right?
Yeah, the LA Times stuff, which I'm no longer involved with, you can find best at latimes.com/podcasts. And also you can find LA Times pretty easily on any of the podcast platforms. There's also several podcasts that we created. I created 20 there. There's 5 of them that are branded that are not there. So you'd have to work a little harder to find those because the newsroom and the business team are pretty separate. My radio show is called Hip Hop Hello. It's on KUAF, the NPR station up there, and it's also on KOBV, a small community station in Bentonville. You can find that. Probably the best way is Instagram, Hip Hop Hello NWA for Northwest Arkansas. The archives are on Mixcloud. I'm currently working for this guy, Chris Jones. I got some buttons and stuff if you're interested. You can find us, chrisforgovernor.com, and Jones for AR on any of the social media platforms.
Who you are also trying to get on other podcasts.
Oh, yeah, thanks, dude.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually, the main reason I signed up and bought a ticket, actually, is that I'm trying to get Chris on podcasts based in Arkansas. So if y'all got podcasts and make it happen. He's been on Irvin's before, that's right. So, your podcast is next, hopefully. Yeah, and Leo's coming up next. You're on deck.
All right.
So Burden will launch on the 30th, and I had a podcast called Uppity Women, and I used to have a nonprofit called Women Lead Arkansas, and our mission was to empower women and girls to engage in politics, policy, and leadership. Uppity Women was kind of born of that, and it sort of fizzled out. I mean, it was fun, but if you wanted, there are some, I think, interesting conversations. But Burden, there's a website, burdenpod.com. We will have a Patreon, with all the videos, because we actually shot a lot of film. So there will be a lot of extras. Wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all those things.
If you were going to have a release party for your podcast, would that be at a physical location?
Karen will be telling you about that.
It will be. It's September 29th from what time did we? 6 to 8 at the Nest in downtown Little Rock. And that location is a co-working space for women by women, but everybody's invited. If you're a man, cool, please come. Free. So Eventbrite has,
That's important.
You can get your tickets on Eventbrite, yes. And you can get there by going to burdenpod.com. We ask that you get a ticket, but tickets are free, just so we know we can plan better. Incredible.
We'll definitely be there. Thank you all for being here and for speaking. Give us your sort of expertise and back history and bringing all that to you're making real change in Arkansas. You're bringing these stories that haven't ever come out to the light. So we appreciate everything that you're doing. I look forward to hearing it when it does come out.
Thank you for doing all this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Please give them a hand.